Margaret Whitlock loved the quiet hum of the library. The scent of aging books and the soothing flicker of sunlight through stained glass windows felt like a balm to her reclusive soul. For the past 2 decades, the Whitlock Library had been both her sanctuary and her world. As head librarian, Margaret took pride in her role as the gatekeeper of knowledge. Though her co-workers often whispered about her strange habits, she kept to herself, rarely attended staff meetings, and rarely socialized outside of work. Some thought her odd, others respected her privacy. Margaret didn't care what people thought. She preferred the company of books to people anyway. But her quiet life was shattered one chilly Monday morning. The day began like any other. Margaret arrived early, unlocking the heavy oak doors to the library before the city had fully stirred awake. She dusted the shelves, arranged the new arrivals, and sank into the rhythm of cataloging. Around 10 a.m., a young man named Paul, who worked part-time at the library, rushed into her office with a nervous energy. "Margaret, there's someone here to see you," Paul stammered. Margaret adjusted her glasses and looked up. "Who?" Before Paul could answer, 2 detectives appeared in the doorway. The older one, Detective Harold Grant, had a stern face with deep creases etched around his mouth. The younger one, Detective Ellie Monroe, had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Margaret Whitlock?" Grant said, stepping forward. "Yes, that's me," she replied, her voice steady despite the unease blooming in her chest. "We're investigating a series of disappearances," Grant continued. "We have reason to believe you might have information related to the case. We'd like you to come with us to answer a few questions." Margaret's heart skipped a beat. "Disappearances? I don't know anything about that." Monroe pulled out a photograph and placed it on Margaret's desk. It was a picture of a young woman with blonde hair and a radiant smile. "Do you recognize her?" Margaret stared at the photo, her mind racing. She looks familiar. I think she visited the library a few times, but I don't know her personally." Monroe's gaze didn't waver. "Her name is Emily Porter. She went missing 3 weeks ago. Her family says she was an aspiring botanist. Do you remember her borrowing any books on the subject?" Margaret hesitated. "I'd have to check the records, but yes, it's possible. We have a large collection on botany." Grant leaned in, his voice low and pointed. "Miss Whitlock, we found her fingerprints on one of your rare books, a first edition on plant toxins. Care to explain how it ended up in her possession?" Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. "That book, it's part of our private collection. It's not available for public borrowing. Are you saying she stole it?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Grant replied. "But here's where it gets complicated. We've also linked you to 2 other missing persons. Both were last seen visiting this library. Both had connections to rare books found in their belongings." Margaret's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her desk. "This is absurd. I have no idea what you're talking about. Are you accusing me of something?" Monroe's expression softened, but her tone remained firm. "We're not accusing you yet, but we need to investigate all possibilities. The coincidences are hard to ignore. We'd like you to come down to the station for further questioning." A chilling discovery. Margaret reluctantly agreed, her mind spinning as she followed the detectives to their car. She couldn't fathom how she'd become entangled in such a nightmare. At the station, the questions continued. The detectives pressed her about the missing persons, her knowledge of the rare books, and her personal life. Margaret answered truthfully, but felt the weight of their suspicion growing with each passing moment. After hours of questioning, she was finally allowed to leave. As she stepped out into the crisp evening air, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. When she returned home, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. She lived in a small, cluttered apartment above a bookstore, surrounded by piles of old manuscripts and antique books. The space was her haven, but tonight it felt oppressive. Margaret decided to distract herself by reviewing the library's records. She opened her laptop and accessed the borrowing history for the rare books in question. To her horror, she found that the records had been altered. Someone had tampered with the system, making it appear as though the missing persons had checked out the rare books. But Margaret knew that wasn't possible. Those books were locked away in the library's vault, accessible only to her and a handful of trusted staff members. A sudden knock at her door startled her. She froze, her heart pounding. "Margaret, it's Paul," a voice called from the other side. She opened the door to find Paul standing there, looking anxious. "I heard what happened today," he said. "Are you okay?" Margaret nodded, though she didn't feel okay at all. "Paul, did you alter the library's records?" His eyes widened. "What? No, why would I do that?" "I don't know," Margaret muttered, "but someone did. Someone's trying to frame me." Paul hesitated, then said, "Maybe you should take some time off, Margaret. This whole thing, it's a mess. And honestly, people are starting to talk. You've always been a bit of a mystery to everyone." Margaret's gaze hardened. "I don't need time off. I need to find out who's doing this." The note. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the library early, determined to uncover the truth. As she unlocked the main doors, she noticed an envelope taped to the inside of the glass. Her name was scrawled on the front in jagged handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a chilling message. "You think you know the story, but you're just another chapter. Stop looking or you'll be next." Margaret's blood ran cold. Someone wanted her to stay silent. Someone wanted her to disappear, just like the others. But Margaret wasn't about to back down. Whoever was behind this had underestimated her. As she clutched the note, a new determination sparked within her. She was going to find the real culprit, no matter the cost. The note weighed heavily in Margaret's trembling hands. The jagged handwriting and the chilling threat sent shivers down her spine. She scanned the library's quiet halls, but the shadows seemed to press closer, offering no clues. After locking the note in her office drawer, Margaret began her workday as usual, though nothing felt normal. Her routine tasks, reshelving books, processing returns, and assisting patrons, were laced with paranoia. Every glance from a coworker felt like an accusation. Every step in the library seemed heavier with suspicion. By midday, Margaret decided she needed answers. She had to start where the detectives had begun, with the missing persons. A web of disappearances, Margaret pulled up her laptop and logged into the library's digital archives. She searched for Emily Porter, the first victim the detectives had mentioned. The borrowing record showed Emily had checked out a rare book on plant toxins weeks before her disappearance. But Margaret knew that was impossible. The book in question, The Poisonous Green, was kept in the library's restricted section. It was rare and valuable, available only for in-library reference. It had been one of Margaret's personal favorites, and she remembered vividly that it hadn't left its shelf in years. So how had Emily's fingerprints ended up on it? Margaret dug deeper into Emily's borrowing history, finding an unsettling pattern. Along with The Poisonous Green, Emily had borrowed books about urban gardening, botany, and toxicology. Each seemed to paint a picture of someone engrossed in plants. But Margaret remembered Emily as a casual reader, hardly the type to delve so deeply into a niche subject. The next missing person, Charles Brighton, had checked out books about architecture and structural integrity, titles Margaret didn't even recall being part of the library's inventory. And then there was Paula McKinnon, who had supposedly borrowed volumes on criminology and forensic science. The diversity of interests baffled Margaret, but what unnerved her most was how each missing person's story seemed to revolve around a theme that fit their profession or interests. It was as though someone had been crafting these narratives with deliberate precision. Suspicious connections. The thought made Margaret pause. She had always been meticulous about record keeping, but she rarely questioned where the books came from. She trusted her small team of librarians, including Paul and her assistant Lena, to maintain order, but now her trust was eroding. "Paul," Margaret called, stepping out of her office. Paul looked up from the returns desk, his youthful face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. "What's up?" "I need your help cross-checking borrowing records," Margaret said. "Something doesn't add up with the rare books." Paul hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, I can help. What are we looking for?" Margaret explained the discrepancies in the records. Paul listened intently, his brows furrowed. "You're saying someone tampered with the system?" "That's what it looks like," Margaret said, "and I need to figure out who." Paul followed her back to the office, where they spent hours combing through the database. The deeper they dug, the more inconsistencies they uncovered. Rare books were listed as borrowed by people who had never set foot in the library. Some records had been altered to suggest the books were checked out long before they were added to the collection. It's like someone's creating a paper trail, Paul said, leaning back in his chair. But why? Margaret didn't answer. Her mind was spinning with possibilities. Who would go to such lengths to fabricate borrowing records? And why target her library of all places? The whispering shadows. By the time Paul left for the day, Margaret was exhausted but no closer to an answer. She decided to take another look at the library's security footage. The cameras were old and grainy, their coverage limited to the main halls and entrances. Margaret fast-forwarded through hours of footage, her eyes straining to catch anything unusual. Just as she was about to give up, something caught her attention. The timestamp read 3:45 a.m. 2 weeks ago. The library was closed, the halls dark. Yet the camera near the restricted section flickered to life, capturing a shadowy figure moving down the aisle. The figure was tall and broad-shouldered, their face obscured by a hood. They carried a small flashlight, its beam darting over the shelves. The figure stopped at the restricted section, unlocked the gate with a key, and disappeared inside. Margaret's stomach churned. Who had access to that key? Aside from herself, only Paul and Lena were authorized to open the restricted section. She rewound the footage, trying to make out more details, but the resolution was too poor. Frustrated, she saved the clip to a USB drive, intending to show it to the detectives. Unwelcome visitors. The next morning, Margaret was met with an unsettling sight. A group of police officers was stationed at the library entrance, their presence causing a stir among the patrons. Detective Grant and Detective Monroe stood near the circulation desk, speaking in hushed tones. Margaret approached cautiously. "Detectives, is something wrong?" Grant turned to her, his expression grim. "We've received new evidence linking the library to another disappearance. This time, it's a professor from the university." Margaret's heart sank. A professor? Who? Monroe handed her a photo. It was a middle-aged man with glasses and a kind smile. Dr. Edward Hayes. He specialized in history and often came here for research. Margaret recognized him immediately. Dr. Hayes had been a regular patron, always requesting obscure texts on ancient civilizations. "What does this have to do with me?" Margaret asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We found a rare book from your collection in his office," Grant said. "It was marked as checked out under your name." Margaret felt the world tilt. "That's impossible. I've never borrowed a book from my own library." "That's what we're trying to figure out," Monroe said. "Do you have any idea who might want to implicate you in these disappearances?" Margaret hesitated. She thought of the shadowy figure in the security footage, the altered records, the threatening note. But she wasn't ready to share everything. Not yet. "Not off the top of my head," she said. Grant narrowed his eyes. "Miss Whitlock, we can't ignore the pattern here. If you're withholding information, it could make things worse for you." "I'm not withholding anything," Margaret lied. "I just don't know what's happening." A desperate alliance. After the detectives left, Margaret knew she couldn't handle this alone. She decided to confide in Lena, her assistant. Lena was a quiet but observant woman in her late 30s, with a knack for solving puzzles. When Margaret explained the situation, Lena listened carefully, her sharp eyes narrowing with concentration. "This is serious," Lena said. "If someone's framing you, they're doing a damn good job. But why go to all this trouble?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Margaret said. Lena tapped her chin thoughtfully. "You mentioned altered records and security footage. Have you checked for physical evidence, like fingerprints or anything left behind by the intruder?" Margaret shook her head. "I wouldn't know where to start." "Then let's start together," Lena said, determination flashing in her eyes. The two women spent hours combing through the restricted section, searching for anything out of place. It was Lena who finally found it, a slip of paper tucked inside one of the rare books. The paper was a receipt from a nearby cafe, dated 3 weeks ago. Scribbled on the back was a series of numbers that looked like a code. "What do you think it means?" Margaret asked. Lena studied the numbers. It could be a phone number, coordinates, or even a safe combination. Whatever it is, it's a clue. The frame tightens. As Margaret and Lena tried to decipher the code, Margaret's phone buzzed with a text message. The sender was unknown, and the message was short but chilling. You're getting too close. Stop now, or the next victim will be on your hands. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The sender's number was untraceable, and the message offered no clues. Lena placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll figure this out, Margaret. But we have to be careful. Whoever's behind this isn't playing games. Margaret nodded, though fear coiled in her chest. The shadowy figure, the altered records, the threatening notes, it all pointed to someone with a personal vendetta against her. And as the puzzle pieces began to fall into place, Margaret realized one chilling truth. The story being written wasn't just about the victims, it was about her. The library's once familiar walls felt like a maze Margaret couldn't escape. The threat from the anonymous text loomed over her like a storm cloud, and despite Lena's attempts to comfort her, Margaret knew she was running out of time. Whoever was orchestrating this nightmare wasn't just trying to frame her, they were constructing a twisted story, piece by piece. Margaret's mind buzzed with questions. Why her? What connection did she have to these victims? And what did the cryptic receipt with its strange code mean? She couldn't sit idly anymore. The answers wouldn't come from waiting. A cryptic code. Margaret and Lena sat at the small round table in the break room, their eyes fixed on the numbers scrawled on the back of the cafe receipt. What do you think it is? Lena asked, her voice low. Margaret shook her head. I don't know, but it must be important. Why else would someone leave it hidden in a restricted book? Lena scribbled the numbers onto a notepad. 14, 25, 7, 19, 8, 3. It could be a cipher, Lena suggested, or maybe coordinates. But look here, she pointed to the first three numbers. What if it's a letter substitution? A equals 1, B equals 2, and so on. Margaret frowned. Let's try it. They worked quickly, replacing the numbers with letters. NYGSHC. NYGSHC, Margaret muttered, her brow furrowed. It's nonsense. Maybe it's an anagram, Lena said. After several failed attempts to rearrange the letters into something meaningful, Margaret sighed in frustration. This feels like a dead end. Lena leaned back, tapping the pen against her chin. What if it's not about letters at all? What if it's a clue for where to go? Margaret froze. The cafe. Lena's eyes widened. The receipt came from a place called Brood Awakening. Maybe we should go there and see if it leads to something. A meeting with Detective Grant. Before they could leave, Margaret's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Detective Grant. Miss Whitlock, his gruff voice said, we need you to come down to the station again. Margaret's heart sank. Why? What's happened now? Grant hesitated before answering. There's been another disappearance, a student from the university. Margaret clutched the phone tighter. What does that have to do with me? We found another book from your library at their last known location, Grant said. This time, it was a rare volume on mythology. Margaret's head spun. Another book? Another victim? It felt like the walls were closing in. I'll be there soon, she said, hanging up. The station's secrets. At the station, Margaret was ushered into an interrogation room. Grant sat across from her, a file in his hands. Miss Whitlock, he began, this is becoming a disturbing pattern. Every missing person we've connected to your library seems to have borrowed rare or restricted books. Care to explain? I've told you, Margaret said, struggling to keep her voice calm. Those records have been tampered with. I'm not the one checking out those books. Grant's gaze was piercing. And yet every piece of evidence points back to you. You work with books every day. You know their value, their history. If someone's using them to leave a trail, you'd be the perfect suspect. Margaret's frustration boiled over. I'm being framed. I don't know why or by whom, but someone is orchestrating this to make me look guilty. Grant leaned forward, his voice softening. Then help me. If you're innocent, prove it. Tell me anything you know. Margaret hesitated. Should she mention the shadowy figure from the security footage? The cafe receipt? I found something, she admitted. A receipt from a cafe, hidden in one of the books. It has a series of numbers written on it. I think it might be a clue. Grant's eyes narrowed. Why didn't you bring this to us sooner? I wasn't sure what it meant, Margaret said, but I was going to investigate. Grant sighed. Margaret, this isn't a game. If you're withholding evidence, I'm not, Margaret snapped. I'm trying to figure this out just like you are. Grant studied her for a moment before standing. Fine, show me this receipt. Brood Awakening. An hour later, Margaret and Grant arrived at Brood Awakening, the cozy cafe listed on the receipt. The smell of coffee and baked goods filled the air, but Margaret couldn't enjoy the warmth of the space. Her nerves were frayed, her hands trembling as she clutched the receipt. The barista, a cheerful woman with a flower tattoo on her wrist, greeted them with a smile. Welcome, what can I get for you? Margaret handed her the receipt. Do you recognize this? It's from your cafe. The barista studied it, her smile fading. This is from 3 weeks ago. I remember because the person who left this caused a bit of a scene. Margaret's pulse quickened. What kind of scene? They were arguing with someone, the barista said. A man in a suit. It got heated, but they left before we could intervene. Grant stepped forward. Do you have security cameras? The barista nodded. We keep footage for a month. I'll grab it for you. The mysterious man. Back at the station, the cafe's security footage revealed a surprising twist. The person who had left the receipt was none other than Lena. Margaret's stomach dropped as she watched her assistant argue with a man in a dark suit. The two exchanged harsh words before Lena stormed out, leaving the receipt on the table. What the hell is this? Grant demanded, turning to Margaret. I don't know, Margaret said, her voice shaking. Lena never mentioned anything about this. Grant folded his arms. Do you think she could be involved? Margaret shook her head. No, Lena's been helping me. She wouldn't. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Why hadn't Lena told her about the argument? What else was she hiding? A fractured alliance. Margaret confronted Lena the next morning. Why didn't you tell me about the cafe? Margaret demanded, holding up the receipt. Lena's face turned pale. How did you? I saw the footage, Margaret interrupted. You argued with someone. Who was it, Lena? Lena hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. I can't tell you. Can't or won't? It's complicated, Lena said, her voice cracking. Margaret, you have to trust me. I'm trying to protect you. Margaret felt a wave of anger and betrayal. Protect me? From what? Or from who? Lena didn't answer, and Margaret realized she couldn't trust her assistant anymore. Another note that evening, Margaret found another note waiting for her in the library. This one was even more ominous than the first. The closer you get, the worse it will be. Stay out of this. Margaret's resolve hardened. Whoever was behind this wanted her to back down, but she refused to be intimidated. With or without Lena's help, she was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant putting herself in danger. The unease Margaret felt after confronting Lena was like a stone in her chest. Every glance from her assistant, every pause in her answers, now felt suspicious. Margaret couldn't shake the thought. Could Lena really be part of this? But with the discovery of the second note, Margaret realized she had bigger concerns. Someone was pulling the strings and getting closer to her. She needed to unravel the mystery, and fast. Unearthing connections, determined to make progress, Margaret decided to revisit the victims' profiles. Each of the missing people had been connected to a rare book found in her library. As she combed through her records, she started noticing a pattern. The first victim, Andrew, had borrowed a book on architecture. The second, Clara, had been linked to a collection of classic literature. The most recent, a student named Lily, had taken out a rare mythology text. Margaret pulled out a notebook and began mapping out the details. Architecture, literature, mythology, each discipline was tied to a specific profession or interest. It wasn't random, someone was selecting these books for a reason. But what was the connection between the victims themselves? They didn't seem to have crossed paths outside the library. Margaret racked her brain, but nothing fit. A discovery in the archives. Frustrated, Margaret decided to turn to the library archives. Deep in the basement of the library, the air was heavy with the scent of old paper and dust. The dim light from the overhead bulbs cast eerie shadows on the rows of shelves. Margaret searched through the restricted section, which housed the rarest books. These were the same volumes that had been tied to the missing individuals. As she examined the books, she noticed something strange. On the back cover of each implicated book, there was a faint symbol, a small, intricate marking that looked like an insignia. Margaret had never seen it before. "What is this?" she murmured, running her finger over the embossed mark. Her heart pounded. Was this a signature of the person orchestrating the disappearances? If so, what did it mean? Lena's sudden visit. Before Margaret could investigate further, she heard footsteps descending the stairs. She tensed, gripping the book in her hands. "Margaret?" Lena's voice echoed through the dimly lit room. Margaret exhaled sharply, her heart still racing. "What are you doing down here?" Lena stepped into view, looking nervous. "I came to check on you. You've been down here for hours." Margaret frowned. "I'm fine. You didn't need to follow me." Lena hesitated, her gaze shifting to the book in Margaret's hands. "What's that?" Margaret held it up, pointing to the symbol. "Have you seen this before?" Lena's expression froze. Her reaction was subtle, but Margaret caught it. "You know something," Margaret pressed. "I don't," Lena stammered, but her voice faltered. "Margaret, leave this alone, please. You're putting yourself in danger." Margaret's patience snapped. "What aren't you telling me? You've been acting strange ever since this started. If you know something, now's the time to speak up." Lena's face crumpled. "I'm trying to protect you, Margaret, but if you keep digging, you'll make yourself a target." "I already am a target," Margaret shot back. "So either help me or stay out of my way." Lena opened her mouth as if to say something, but thought better of it. Without another word, she turned and left. A sudden break-in. That night, Margaret returned home exhausted. She barely had time to process her confrontation with Lena before collapsing into bed. Around midnight, she awoke to the sound of glass shattering. Her heart leapt into her throat as she bolted upright. Someone was in her house. Grabbing her phone, she crept out of bed and dialed 911, whispering the situation to the operator. Then she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy book, and moved toward the source of the noise. The living room window was smashed, glass scattered across the floor. Margaret stayed in the shadows, her breath shallow. A dark figure moved through the room, their silhouette illuminated by the faint moonlight. "Who's there?" Margaret demanded, her voice trembling. The figure froze, then bolted toward the back door. Margaret chased after them, but they disappeared into the night before she could get a good look. When the police arrived, they found nothing except the shattered window and muddy footprints. Detective Grant arrived shortly after. "This isn't a coincidence," he said grimly. "Whoever broke in wasn't here to steal anything. They were sending a message." Margaret nodded, her fear turning to anger. "Then I'll send one back. I'm not backing down." A suspicious trail, determined to stay ahead of whoever was targeting her, Margaret decided to follow up on the cafe lead. She couldn't shake the image of Lena arguing with the man in the suit. The cafe owner had provided Detective Grant with a receipt from the day of the argument showing that the man had used a credit card. The name on the card, Victor Greaves. Grant tracked Victor to a local office building where he worked as a financial consultant. Margaret insisted on going with him to confront the man. Victor turned out to be a well-dressed, middle-aged man with a cool demeanor. When Grant questioned him about the cafe encounter, he claimed to have no knowledge of Lena or the argument. "I think you're mistaken," Victor said smoothly. "I don't know anyone named Lena." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "Then why did you argue with her? We have footage of it." Victor's mask slipped for a moment, his expression darkening, but he quickly recovered. "I'm afraid I can't help you." As they left the office, Grant muttered, "He's hiding something." Margaret agreed. But how was Victor connected to the disappearances? An ominous clue. That evening, Margaret received an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "The story you're dying to know." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The message contained a single image, the symbol from the library books, accompanied by the words, "Your chapter is next." Margaret's blood ran cold. Whoever was behind this wasn't just framing her, they were planning to make her the next victim. But Margaret wasn't going to let that happen. She was more determined than ever to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Margaret paced her dimly lit living room, the glow from her laptop screen casting flickering shadows on the walls. The email had shaken her, but it also fueled her determination. "Your chapter is next." The cryptic message felt like a taunt, daring her to act. Margaret realized the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. She had to unravel the mystery before becoming the final piece in someone else's twisted puzzle. Retracing Victor's footsteps. Victor Greaves had lied to her face, and Margaret was sure of it. His connection to Lena and the library's strange occurrences was undeniable. She decided to dig into his past. Using online resources and public records, she uncovered that Victor had once been part of a private book collectors' society called the Silent Quill. The society's purpose was ambiguous, but its members included academics, collectors, and wealthy enthusiasts who shared a passion for rare books. Margaret's pulse quickened. Every victim connected to her library had borrowed a rare book. Could the society be the link tying them all together? She jotted down notes, including the names of a few members she could find. One name stood out: Edward Marsh, a retired professor of literature and former mentor to Victor. If anyone could shed light on Victor's involvement, it might be him. The visit to Edward Marsh. The next morning, Margaret drove to Edward Marsh's home, a crumbling Victorian house on the edge of town. The overgrown garden and peeling paint gave the property an eerie atmosphere. Margaret hesitated at the door, but her resolve pushed her forward. Edward answered after several knocks, his hunched frame and piercing eyes giving him the appearance of a bird of prey. He invited her in, offering tea as she explained her questions about Victor and the Silent Quill. "Victor Greaves," Edward said, sipping his tea thoughtfully. "An ambitious man, but reckless. He always sought to use the society for his own gain." Margaret leaned forward. "What kind of gain?" Edward hesitated, his expression darkening. The society started innocently enough, but some members believed rare books held more than just historical value. They saw them as tools to manipulate and control. Victor was especially drawn to this idea. "What does that have to do with the disappearances?" Margaret pressed. Edward set his cup down with a shaky hand. "I don't know the details, but Victor often spoke of creating a legacy, a grand narrative in which he would play the author. He believed the books could guide him. But I left the society before things escalated." Margaret's chest tightened. Edward's words painted a chilling picture. Could Victor be orchestrating the disappearances to construct some kind of macabre story? Before she left, Edward warned her, "Be careful, Miss Clark. Victor is dangerous, and his obsession runs deep." A betrayal in plain sight. Back at the library, Margaret found Lena waiting for her. Her assistant's nervous energy was palpable, and Margaret decided it was time for answers. "Lena, we need to talk," Margaret said firmly. "I know you've been hiding something. Tell me the truth. What's your connection to Victor?" Lena's face went pale. She fidgeted with her hands, avoiding Margaret's gaze. Finally, she sighed. "I didn't want to get you involved, but I used to work for him." Margaret's stomach dropped. "You what?" "Years ago, I was an intern at a literary archive Victor funded," Lena admitted. "He seemed charming at first, but his obsession with rare books was unsettling. When I left, I thought I'd escaped him, but a few months ago, he reached out. He wanted access to your library." Margaret's mind raced. "And you let him?" Lena shook her head vigorously. "No, I told him to stay away. But he threatened me, Margaret. He said he'd ruin my life if I didn't cooperate. I didn't know what else to do." Margaret felt a mix of anger and pity. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was scared," Lena said, tears welling in her eyes. "But I'll help you now, whatever you need." The trap is set. With Lena's confession, Margaret felt closer to the truth, but also more vulnerable. She couldn't trust anyone fully, not even her assistant. Determined to confront Victor, she devised a plan to draw him out. Margaret arranged a public event at the library, a rare book exhibition showcasing the same volumes connected to the victims. She suspected Victor wouldn't be able to resist such an opportunity. Lena reluctantly agreed to help, despite her lingering fear. The night of the exhibition, the library buzzed with activity. Patrons wandered through the aisles, admiring the displayed books. Margaret kept a watchful eye on the crowd, scanning for Victor. She didn't have to wait long. Victor entered the library, his confident stride and tailored suit making him stand out. Margaret's heart raced as she observed him from a distance. He moved toward the rare book section, his eyes gleaming with a predatory intensity. Lena, stationed nearby, gave Margaret a subtle nod. They had planted a hidden camera to capture Victor's actions. Margaret approached him, forcing a smile. "Victor, I'm surprised to see you here." Victor turned, his expression unreadable. "Margaret, how could I miss such an event?" The conversation was tense, each word a veiled challenge. Margaret pushed him subtly, asking pointed questions about his interest in the books. Victor deflected with charm, but Margaret noticed a flicker of annoyance when she mentioned the silent quill. A deadly warning. The exhibition ended without incident, but Margaret felt uneasy. Victor had left abruptly, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was planning something. That night, she received another email. This time, it wasn't a taunt, it was a video. The footage showed a darkened room where someone was bound and gagged. A voice, distorted and chilling, whispered, "Your next chapter awaits." Margaret's blood ran cold. The victim's face was obscured, but the library book clutched in their hands was unmistakable. It was the mythology text linked to Lily, the last victim. Margaret knew she was running out of time. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they painted was more horrifying than she had imagined. Someone was crafting a story, one that blurred the lines between fiction and reality, and Margaret was both the protagonist and the prey. Margaret sat at her desk, staring at the video replaying on her laptop screen. The distorted voice echoing in her ears made her stomach churn. The bound figure in the video clutched the mythology book with trembling hands. Every detail of the scene felt designed to unnerve her, and it worked. She paused the video, freezing the image of the victim. She couldn't make out their face, but the dimly lit background held clues. An old brick wall, a single overhead bulb, and shadows hinting at metal beams. It looked like a storage facility or a basement. Victor's sending a message, she thought grimly. But was it a warning or an invitation? Margaret needed help. She couldn't do this alone anymore. An unlikely ally. Margaret turned to the only person who might understand, Detective Monroe. The detective met her at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. Her sharp eyes scrutinized Margaret as she explained everything, the emails, the connection to the victims, and her growing suspicion of Victor Greaves. "This is the first time you've mentioned Victor," Monroe said, leaning back in her seat. "Why now?" Margaret hesitated. "I didn't have proof before, but after tonight I'm sure he's involved. He was at the library event. He's obsessed with rare books, and he has a connection to the victims through the Silent Quill Society." Monroe's expression softened slightly. "And you think he's taunting you with these videos?" Margaret nodded. "I know how it sounds, but Victor is playing a game, and I'm his target. I need to find out where that video was filmed. Someone's life depends on it." Monroe considered her words carefully. Finally, she said, "I'll look into Victor, but I need you to promise me something. Don't confront him alone. If he's as dangerous as you say, he won't hesitate to harm you." Margaret agreed, but deep down she knew she couldn't wait for the police to act. The clue in the shadows. Margaret spent the next morning analyzing the video again. She focused on the shadows in the background, trying to pinpoint anything familiar. Suddenly, something clicked. The beams in the video looked identical to those in an old storage facility near the docks. An abandoned place the locals often spoke of with unease. She called Lena, her voice urgent. "I think I know where the video was filmed. It's the old warehouse by the docks. Meet me there in an hour." "Margaret, are you sure this is safe?" Lena asked nervously. "It's not safe, but it's necessary," Margaret replied. The warehouse at dusk. The warehouse loomed over Margaret like a steel monster. Rusted metal doors groaned as she pushed them open. The air inside was damp and smelled of decay. She clutched a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. "Margaret, this place is giving me the creeps," Lena whispered, sticking close behind her. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. Margaret scanned the space, looking for anything that matched the video. Then she saw it, a small makeshift setup with a chair, a rope, and a single overhead bulb. The scene from the video had been staged here. "It's empty," Lena said, her voice shaking with relief. Margaret's relief was short-lived. On the chair lay another library book, its pages open to a handwritten note. "You're getting warmer. Keep going." A trap is sprung. Margaret's heart pounded as she read the note. Victor was watching her, leading her deeper into his twisted narrative. She turned to Lena, her voice firm. "We need to leave. Now." Before they could move, the warehouse door slammed shut. A metallic clang echoed through the space, followed by the sound of footsteps. Margaret and Lena froze. "Going somewhere?" a voice called out. Victor stepped into the light, his smile cold and calculated. Margaret steadied herself. "What do you want, Victor? Why are you doing this?" Victor chuckled. "Oh, Margaret, always asking questions, always trying to solve the mystery, don't you see? You're part of the story now. Every great narrative needs a protagonist, and you're perfect for the role." Lena clutched Margaret's arm, her fear palpable. Margaret glared at Victor. "What about the victims, the lives you've destroyed? Are they just characters to you?" Victor's smile faltered for a moment, then returned. "They're necessary sacrifices. Every story demands conflict, loss, and resolution. And you, my dear, are heading toward the climax." An unexpected twist. Margaret knew she had to keep Victor talking while she figured out a way to escape. "You're delusional," she said, her voice steady. "This isn't a story, it's real life." Victor tilted his head. "Real life is boring. Stories are what make life meaningful. Don't you agree, Margaret?" Suddenly, Lena spoke up, her voice trembling but defiant. "You're not as clever as you think, Victor. The police already know. About you." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Do they?" At that moment, the sound of sirens pierced the air outside the warehouse. Victor's confident demeanor cracked as he glanced toward the door. Margaret seized the opportunity. She grabbed a rusted pipe from the floor and swung it toward Victor. He dodged, but the movement caused him to lose his balance. Lena joined in, throwing a crate at him. The combined effort gave them just enough time to run toward the door. The final confrontation. Outside, Detective Monroe and her team were waiting. Guns drawn, they surrounded the warehouse. Victor stumbled out, his hands raised but his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over, Margaret," he hissed as officers restrained him. Monroe approached Margaret, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "Are you two okay?" Margaret nodded, though her hands trembled. "Victor, he's been orchestrating everything. He called it a story." Monroe glanced at Victor, now being hauled into a police car. "We'll get the truth out of him." "But you did good, Margaret. You brought him down." The last chapter days later, Margaret sat in her library trying to process everything. The books that had once brought her joy now felt tainted. But as she organized the shelves, she found a sense of closure. Lena entered holding 2 cups of tea. The police said Victor's facing life in prison. They found evidence linking him to all the victims. Margaret sighed. "It's not enough to bring them back, but at least it's over." Lena hesitated. "You're a hero, Margaret. You saved lives." Margaret managed a small smile. "I'm just a librarian who refused to be anyone's story." As the sun set outside the library, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. The chapters of her life had been rewritten, but she was ready to turn the page.